Okay, let's get started. Share my screen here. So welcome to the Cruse Avenue Vision presentation. My name is Adam Hughes. I'm with Better City, and I'll be providing an introduction and scope of work overview that's brought us to where we are today. And with me is Mike Dowling with Dowling Architects, and Mike is going to present a sketch of the Cruse Avenue vision. So to give you a little bit of background and scope of work overview, Cruse Avenue had been identified a couple years ago as part of the downtown plan as being an opportunity for a visioning initiative. And that stems from just the very nature of Cruse Avenue having been developed in the late 1960s, early 1970s as part of the Model Cities program. That was really planned as an arterial to connect into a highway interchange at the southern bookend of downtown that never materialized. And so we have this relic from those planning initiatives that was really designed and engineered for a different purpose. And there's an opportunity to revision what Cruse Avenue could be that might best align with the community's goals and objectives and visions for the area. So the city issued an RFP late last year for conducting this vision and selected our team of Better City and Dowling Architects to assist the city in its development. The scope of work includes Cruse Avenue beginning at the intersection of Park Avenue to the south, extending up to Lawrence Street. The work commenced in March of 2020, and we reviewed a pretty robust list of prior plans. We conducted dozens of stakeholder interviews and gathered as much information and input from the community as we could during March, April, and May, and developed some preliminary sketches and alternatives that were presented at virtual open houses conducted May 26th through the 28th. We held 5 different virtual open house sessions during that period of time. And we utilized the feedback and input from those meetings as well as subsequent comments that were received through the city to refine the vision and also prepare a document that is available on the city website. And so with that, the meeting schedule, this is the second session of 2 sessions. The last one was conducted last night that will be soliciting public input on this refined vision, and would really like to hear your thoughts, and we're very thankful for your participation. After tonight, the next steps are going to be the vision will be presented to City Council at a future meeting to be scheduled, and subsequent to receiving City Council feedback, that vision will be made final. Public comments and input will be received up until that final vision is presented to City Council, and so we encourage all comments to be provided sooner rather than later. And again, we want to thank you for your participation and input throughout this process. So instructions for the meeting. Meeting is being moderated by Stephanie Reinhardt with the City of Helena. Comments and questions can be made through the chat function as well as the raise your hand function. And those will be monitored by Mike McConnell, again with the City of Helena. And Mike and I will periodically review submitted comments and address those as we go through the presentation. We had presented 3 alternatives in the prior virtual open houses. The first alternative was to improve active transportation, so pedestrian and bicycle access while maintaining vehicular access. Alternative 2 was kind of an extreme alternative that would have dedicated crews only for active transportation while mostly eliminating vehicular access. And then alternative 3 was a combination of alternatives 1 and 2, utilizing a hybrid approach in some areas, having crews dedicated to active transportation, and other areas where vehicular access was to be maintained. So of those three alternatives, from the virtual open house, we saw consistent support for alternative one, with most concerns regarding parking, neighborhood center relocation, and the design of new residential product, which we've incorporated and have looked to address in the revised Cruse Avenue vision, as well as the Cruse Avenue document that is available on the city website. There wasn't much support for alternative 2 or 3, and that was really helpful for us to really zero in on the appropriate alternative that the community wants to see and really focus on refining that. The refined vision to alternative 1 really considers 2 options within that alternative, and that is to leave in place the neighborhood center or relocate it on site to a newly constructed facility. And the area where the neighborhood center is received quite a bit of attention as we've gone through this process to try and improve circulation and access between Cruse Avenue and the walking mall. And one of the considerations that we had noted as we've gone through the stakeholder interviews and the open house process was the residents really wanted to see improved circulation, access, and permeability between the neighborhoods and downtown. And we felt like this area was a good focal point for that. And you'll also notice in the vision along the avenue in some really good permeable corridors between the neighborhoods, crossing Cruse and down into the downtown. To address the parking issue, there's a parking observation that was conducted in June that showed 25% utilization of parking lots, and that the proposed improvements would result in a net change of a loss of 52 parking lots on the Cruse Avenue corridor, which we're taking into consideration the utilization wouldn't be that impactful in terms of limiting parking availability. There's still some questions concerning that with the observation and this initiative being conducted during COVID-19. And so I think that's something that the city and stakeholders will need to continue to monitor as we move forward to really strike the appropriate balance between the improvements that are going to be made and the availability and provisioning of parking in the area. So with that, I'm unable to see any comments as I'm presenting. So are there any comments or questions that have been made?
We haven't had any yet, Adam.
Okay. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to stop my screen share, and then I'll turn it over to Mike Dowling with Dowling Architects, and he is going to present the refined vision.
Thanks, Adam. I will share my screen. All right. So Adam, my internet connection is a little bit weak today. So if there's any issues with this, let me know.
No, I'm seeing a really good connection on my end.
Okay, good. All right, so this is just a visual of the existing section of Cruse that we are addressing from Lawrence Street on the far right to the south, and south is to the left on the screen here, where Cruse comes down and intersects Park. And just a couple of things that are relevant as we look at Cruse. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Cruse Avenue, we all know, seems like a really wide sea of asphalt that cuts through this part of town. And in fact, it is. The right-of-way of Cruse Avenue is approximately 65 feet wide, which in itself is really not that wide. By example, Last Chance Gulch in front of the bagel company is actually 70 feet wide. And 14th Street, a typical sort of arterial street that feeds in, is only 60 feet wide. The main difference with Cruse is it's asphalt from edge to edge. So whereas on a normal street, we might have 40 feet of asphalt, along Cruse, we've got 65 feet of asphalt. The next thing I think that's relevant to point out is just the distance that pedestrians have to cross at the intersections. You know, if you imagine Cruse itself is 65 feet wide, the distance from where a pedestrian enters that, you know, danger zone where vehicles are at this point here, for example, to the point where they get back on, it probably exceeds over 100 feet of length. And it varies from location to location, but that's extreme in any scenario. So as we look at, you know, several things that can happen here, one is improving safety. The other is just improving, as Adam mentioned, the connectivity between the neighborhood, you know, like the Rodney Street neighborhood and the downtown. Those are particular areas where it's very simple to improve that pedestrian connection. So the solution that we're showing today is really very similar to the solution we showed before, which was what we called the narrowed street option. The primary difference has just been some refinement in that, in little areas, and then looking at the area where the neighborhood center currently is and what could potentially be done there. But the primary change, as I was alluding to, is narrowing up the street so that it is not 65 feet of asphalt. If we plan for 2 vehicular lanes, approximately 12 feet, they could be as narrow as 11 feet, but I'm assuming 12. And then parallel parking on both sides of that street, we come up with a 40-foot width of street section. Alongside the street would be a bike lane of approximately 8 feet wide. So that would actually be down at street level, and it would be separated from the parking by a raised curb. So there'd be protection there. And then beyond that point is where we get into essentially improved landscaping, pedestrian walkways, seating areas, benches, pretty much all along Cruse Avenue. So where we come to intersections, the parking area obviously goes away, and we're able to narrow up the crossing to 24 feet, which is pretty good, a whole lot safer than what it is now. Where Cruse meets Park, we still have a small sort of city park area, that area is actually used today fairly well for dogs and people just relaxing. Everything that's in red are new rooftops. So they're either going to be residential, single family houses or a building. So at the far south end, we're showing a building type which would be row house style units. So they're attached together on the sides, townhouse, row house style buildings. And we've gone with this type because it's historically, especially in areas like Baltimore, Maryland, or urban areas where affordable housing needed to be close to people's workplaces, it was a very common building type. And it's semi-urban, semi-rural, and is a good balance of affordable housing that is near to the downtown. In many cases, there's opportunity for garages on the main level, and then possibly even 2 levels of living above that. So a 2 to 3 story unit is pretty common. So that's what we're seeing in this location. The intersection at this location where Cutler Street comes into Cruse would get completely narrowed down. The right-of-way is very wide here on both sides as a part of that transportation design that was done in the late 60s. And so we've got crosswalks, bulbed out curbs, again, eliminating the parking along each side so that we've got 24-foot wide pedestrian and bicycle crossing. As before, the right-of-way next to Emmy Anderson and the Helena Housing Authority can be made available for an additional building there, and Helena Housing Authority has expressed interest in doing that. So we see this sort of multi-story building that would have access from the lower level directly to Emmy Anderson, and then upper level to Cruse and Cutler, and sort of the parkland space that gets created. Then the new idea is, in this solution, is to create a new building, a new neighborhood center, sort of in the area where the current parking lot is. This does a couple of things. So the biggest move is that it allows the pedestrian areas along Cruse to have a really nice connection to the walking mall. Wide, same width as the current walking mall, sort of an extension of that loop so that it improves sort of the viability of this part of the mall itself. This building would be multi-story with parking underneath it. So it would have structured parking as a part of its solution, have direct access from the lower levels to the walking mall area and the parkland space, and then from the upper level directly onto Cruse and across to Helena Housing Authority's property. So then as we get to this sort of circular plaza space, this would just be a change in material in the streetscape, perhaps a little raised intersection to pay homage to the fire tower, and have, this is where the pedestrian underpass is, some ability to have an overlook into the parks below, seating along the upper area, improved access down. There is no access on this side down to that pedestrian underpass, so we would do that. And this link between the fire tower, visually between the fire tower and this node and the parks below is just, it's actually a pretty incredible view corridor. And then lastly, in this area, we have an opportunity to create some stairs that would lead up to the trail system that actually gets people to the base of the fire tower, and also connects across up above near the park and would come down to a set of stairs near Broadway. And then lastly, on this block, where we have the current stairs that go down into the lower lot and into the walking mall area, we would do a narrowed crossing right there as well, so that we sort of improve that west to east connectivity from the neighborhoods and the walking areas into the mall. So the next option in that area, everything's the same except for the area around the neighborhood center. And this presumes that the neighborhood center stays. There's no changes to the parking lot. And what we would do is just actually make a extension of the walkways. There currently is no walkway right in this area. It's just a curb and asphalt over to an existing sort of link that gets down to the parks. So make something that's perhaps 10 feet wide rather than 4 or 5 feet wide, and make this, you know, at least a connection to the walking mall from Cruse Avenue. And other than that, there wouldn't be any changes. And what's interesting too about this is, if this solution doesn't preclude this solution from happening in the future. So if funds are made available to do the improvements along Cruse Avenue, and there isn't yet a plan in place to do a new neighborhood center building, all of these improvements could be done. And then at a later time, this whole area could happen as a project by itself. So it's kind of a win-win scenario in that area. So then as we look at the section from Broadway to Lawrence, this intersection along Broadway is where I illustrated before, that 100-foot wide, and I'm just guessing at that, approximately 100 feet of walking area would be reduced down to somewhere around 24 feet, both going across Broadway and Cruse Avenue as well. We're showing all new housing in lot 6, which is in this location here. Another opportunity to improve sort of the connectivity between the residential area. There's actually currently a stair that goes down right here. It just kind of goes into the parking lot and then dissipates. But we have an opportunity, I think, to connect that across, narrow the crossing of Cruse here again. This is an existing pathway that actually leads down, and we have an opportunity to make that complete link down to the walking mall again. It was pointed out last night, something that we missed is that there is a vehicular access needed to the second level of this parking structure. So I think a modification of this will still allow that pedestrian area, but we wouldn't have the green space there. We need to maintain vehicular access into that. So then moving along, we have lot 4, which is accessed right now off of Cruse, and also is the access to the top deck of the Jackson Street garage. Some more residential units there with tuck under garages coming off of the parking lot. And then across the street, same housing type in a couple of spots that would be given up in the city's chamber lot. And so right now the access off of Cruse into that lot would be eliminated, and it would just be in and out on 6th. Another intersection with bulbed out curbs to reduce those crossings. With these diagonals, they might be a little longer than 24 feet, but would be immensely better than what we have there now. The Helena Independent Record property has been purchased, and they are considering building a residential building on that property as well. So we're just showing this as a placeholder for that as well. And then the area, this is where the 7th Avenue gym is, and this is actually about a, I don't know, 15 or 16 foot high drop from the sidewalk along here that has a chain link fence this entire distance down to the parking lot below. But what's interesting about this is this location has just incredible views of our downtown city county building, the Montana Club building, Mount Helena in the background. And so the idea of creating a little rest spot, plaza space with an overlook and some benches and a staircase that sort of leads down, and again, could be an improved connection over to Constitution Park, which is really where the beginning of the walking mall is. And as we finish up moving to the north, the sidewalk actually moves to the other side of the street. It's fairly tight. We've got green space on the west side, so moving it to the east side allows us to take advantage of that view I talked about earlier and a couple of other views, and then just ends with the final reduction in crossing. And then we have a placeholder here in part of the lot across from the Holter where there's an opportunity to do a commercial building, ground floor, retail, perhaps upper floor residential in that location as well. So what will it look like? And that's going to be what we're working on next. We have started a sketch of what this housing could look like and the street section with a view that is taken from right here where my cursor is and looks directly south. So here we have that housing stock of row house, townhouse style buildings in lot 6, separated by the public sidewalk with a shallow front yards, direct access to the front doors, the sidewalk, 8-foot wide sidewalk, an 8-foot wide boulevard with street trees, and then our bike lane separated from the street and parking by a raised curb. And then the fire tower is right there in the background there, so you can see the context. So then the last thing I'll go over, and again, as Adam mentioned, we recognize that these numbers of utilization rates are being taken at a time when our downtown is definitely not being fully utilized, so we'll want to redo this again in the future. But what is accurate is going to be the amount of parking spaces. So right now, the top section of this chart are the street sections, and they're broken into 3 pieces from Lawrence to 6th, 6th to Broadway, and Broadway to Park. And then down below are the 4 lots that border Cruse Avenue as well. We have 169 on-street parking spaces for a total of 431 spaces in the project area. With the changes that are being proposed, we would increase the number of on-street spaces from 169 to 237, and we would reduce the total from 431 down to 379, and that's where the loss of 52 is. And those are primarily in 2 areas, lot 6, which is where that previous image showed the residential units, we'd lose 36. The chamber lot, we would lose 17. And then lot 4, which is across from the chamber, we lose whatever that number is. So just to quickly go through the counts that we did on 3 different days at 3 different times of the day, went up and counted every vehicle that was parked in each of these sections. Some of the lots we didn't get to until later, but the numbers are shown in this column, and then the orange column is the utilization percentage. And it's really no surprise, I don't think these percentages will change that much, that the areas that are closest to the downtown, Lawrence to 6th, for example, has a higher utilization than the part that's further away, the Broadway to Park, which has a lower utilization. And then the lot percentages, again, lot 4 is actually the highest utilized lot of all of them, even today. But it's still 37%, and that lot has some long-term parking, MDT vehicles and things like that reside there, because every time I went to take account, they were still there. So big picture views, this is the combined solution with the new neighborhood center. We feel like this does capture sort of the good things that we had in our park solution before, where we do have considerably more street trees and landscape areas and pedestrian walkways and sidewalks that are more user-friendly, alongside having a maintained vehicular access throughout the entire zone. And then the solution where the neighborhood center may not get done until a later time, if at all. So that is a synopsis of where we're at.
Great, thank you, Mike. If there's anyone that has any comments or questions, feel free to use the chat or the raise your hand function to let us know what those are, and we can address them right now.
It looks like they're
Michael O'Neill, you can go ahead.
Alrighty. Hey, thanks for the presentation and thanks for your work on this. I think it will be a great improvement for the city of Helena. Had a question about, so the kind of the intersection between the Helena Housing Authority and the neighborhood center. Now, so on either of the options, they're the same. Is there any one loss of usable space in terms of one option versus the other? In terms of the ability to develop land for additional housing in that.
They're identical, Michael.
Okay. So my second question is, I have had an interest of seeing the street moved as far to the south as possible to create the Cutler Street or State Street, whatever you refer to it, coming down the hill into Cruse there at that intersection. That our thinking is that if there was to be value in terms of potentially more housing or other development done on the Emmy Anderson site, which is the big, X building, red X, that certainly maximizing the available land available for any future development or renovations or improvements.
And Michael, that is, if you look at the image that's up on the screen, I don't know if you can see it, but that's actually what it does. We've justified it to the south edge of that right of way,
okay,
abandoning as much of it to the north as possible. I do think
my
it's
question
important.
is, since we own the other, across the way from there is our Cutler Street housing. Is an issue of needing more right of way, or is usable right of way is what is really already maximized, and so us providing a little more right of way on the south side would not create any more space on the other side. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, if we made boundary line adjustments to that right of way, that whole section of street could be pushed a little bit further to the south if it doesn't have a negative effect on your other property. I'm not sure logistically.
Yeah.
If there's any issues with the
I guess that's
city.
just my question, if that can be explored so that we can maximize land on.
Certainly.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the consideration.
You're welcome.
So, Mike, we have another question from Lexi. She's wanting to know how excited or other emotions does this project feel to the speakers? Do you mind elaborating on the economic potential here?
Well, I'll speak for myself. I mean, I think it's incredibly exciting. I've been living in Helena almost my entire life, and I think the idea of having additional living units so close to our downtown is absolutely what's needed to bring our downtown back to life, or not necessarily back to life, but extend its hours of functionality so that, the sidewalks don't get rolled up at 5 o'clock in the evening, for example. It's been a ongoing, I've been dealing with planning studies in our downtown for over 20 years. And it's definitely a cart and horse discussion. Does our downtown come to life by building more commercial buildings, which I think is a common thought. And then the reality is that if we get people living in the area, they will spend their evenings at the restaurants and dining establishments and stores and in the parks. And so this is incredibly exciting to me.
Thank you, Mike, for that. And I echo what, excuse me, what Mike just shared. I think going through this process, what we've really tried to do is balance the needs of a number of different stakeholders and interest groups with this vision. You know, there are some that have wanted to reduce, you know, the parking and the vehicular access and expand, you know, residential and pedestrian and bicycle access. And others whose concerns were primarily around parking and ensuring that access and convenience was still being maintained, and others that were wanting permeability across Cruse because it is such a boundary into the downtown. And so I think this vision has tried to balance each of those different interests in creating something that is a pretty comprehensive approach. In terms of emotions, I would echo what Mike said. I am excited about this. I think it's a project that's doable. And if the community can get behind this in terms of allocating funding for it, I think it would really be transformational in terms of being able to improve the vibrancy and the streetscape of the downtown, and will hopefully also lead to additional private sector investment in other areas as well. I love how it incorporates recreation and improving access to some of the recreational assets that are along Main Street and Fire Tower Park as well.
Great, thank you, Adam. We had a question from Kathy, and then we'll get to Paul, Sharon, and Pam. But Kathy's question was about the townhomes on lot 6, if we're envisioning them to include tuck under garages.
That's a great question. And anybody who's familiar with that lot right now, the way I have this drawn, that would be difficult to do. This is the one section of units that it would take some pretty creative design to make that happen. We haven't designed the buildings themselves yet. I don't think it would make sense to have a bunch of driveways that come off of Cruse accessing the fronts of these. So these particular units may have to take advantage of parking in the area, very similar to what the Placer residents in the Placer building do. They don't have their own dedicated parking, but all the others do have the opportunity because they back up to either a parking lot, or as in the instance of the very south section, we have the ability to have a rear alley that could access the back of those units. So that's a good observation and good question.
So Mike, just to add to that, is one of the issues just the grade,
Yes.
and the topography between Warren Street and these lots?
Warren Street, I haven't measured it, but it probably varies from a low of maybe 4 or 5 foot elevation change where Warren is higher. If it was the other way around, we could get into the back of the units off of Warren Street, but you would be entering at an elevated, not to say it couldn't be done. Again, we haven't designed them, but you could have, you know, sort of parking, a garage in the back half of those units that you access from there, and then a split level down to a front door entrance, for example.
Thank you, Mike. I'm gonna just say Pam Attardo's comment. She just mentions that Helen has some great historic Italianate townhouses that could serve as examples for this type of housing in and around the Helena Historic District. So keep that in mind, you know, whenever anyone does design those buildings.
Get to designing them, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good comment.
And then we'll move on to Paul. I'll just, Paul, you're now unmuted. If you could state your question or comment.
Yeah, I have a few. Let's start, I guess, with Warren Street, or the lot you were just talking about. What about opening the houses, facing the houses onto Warren Street, and then you would have tuck under garage, and you'd complete, give that street some boundaries, which would make it a much more comfortable place. I know that this driveway's off Cruse that Mike was worried about, but on the other hand, I don't see much pedestrian flow going down there. There being better streets both north and south to handle that traffic, and otherwise it's just down 6th or down Lawrence. So if you made Warren the face street for all that housing, you take care of the garage problem. You'd also have far better views over the city for those housing, because they would be raised up above the garage. That was one thought. Then moving south, if you can. When you looked at the options there for the neighborhood center, it seems to me there's a third possibility, which would be nice to sketch out. If it were to be rebuilt, basically the only difference between rebuilding there and rebuilding somewhere else is the land costs. I would think if that area was turned into housing, which could have bi-level entrances off Cruse and off the what's the parking lot right now, that would more than make up the amount of money we need to buy a new piece of land. So if that was housing along that whole stretch, it'd be nice to see that option laid out. Was that clear enough to you, Mike?
Yeah, you're saying like it would just be up at the Cruse Avenue Street level?
No, it'd be
Or down?
You'd have one level coming off the Cruse, a walk-in off Cruse, then you'd also have walk-in off the parking lot level.
Gotcha.
So you could
Yep.
stack 2 units there, but both of them be ground level, which is important to a large amount of the demographic that might be interested in living down there. And then with the profits from that sale, you would buy the land, and then you're back to rebuilding the cost of building the building, but you have that whether you put it there or put it someplace else.
Gotcha.
And,
Yep.
So nice to, at least it's hypothetically, put it as something to be considered when we get to the neighborhood center. The final question is, why didn't you consider parcel 4 as part of the plan? And that's that space between Dale Harris Park and the west end at Pine Street. Is there a technical reason?
You have to orient me.
Okay, so south of Emmy Anderson, there's a Cutler Apartments. Then the Pine Street is that one that dead ends there. You can see the old right-of-way of Pine Street in the dark green.
Yep.
And then come a little bit to the west.
To the west
Yeah,
or south?
West, because Dale Harris Park ends about where you've got the that first red building there.
Right up here.
Yeah, so that's the end of the park. And that whole area is parcel 4 that's basically undeveloped. So
It's undeveloped for a reason. I mean, it is so steep right there. I mean, I did look at that and was thinking about it, but the steepness of the slopes in this area are really prohibitive to any economical solutions. Not to say that money wouldn't solve it, but
I guess I would argue a little, by and large, certainly everything above the trail is, nothing can be done. And actually much lower, it's still a problem. But if you brought Pine Street out and curved it, maybe 100 yards, it couldn't go much further than that. That looked fairly buildable. The other interesting thing was the slope on Cruse. If that land was available, then you could build 1 or 2 more rows of housing basically straight into the slope, using that and use part of that and part of the Cruse right away to make room for those.
I'll look at it again, Paul. It is a good point. If and you know, ideally, if this spurs people to do additional development, I think it's a great thing. I mean, just what we're showing, I think, are the things that are pretty easy for the city to accommodate in a plan, but there's going to be additional opportunities along here for private development as well.
Yeah. I hope that gets brought out, because the trouble with plans like this that show a lot of neat things with no obvious way how to fund them is that people say we were promised a winding trail with trees and everything at the base of Pine, or what, you know, pick any section. We were promised this, and while you're not making a promise, the fact that it's drawn will be taken as a promise. This has been my experience with other plans. So yeah, it seems to be
part of the plan here, and I'll let Adam speak to this, is to provide some full funding alternatives and mechanisms that the city can use. And you know, that is one of the things that I've seen lacking in a lot of the previous plans, is something gets drawn up and it looks like a great idea, but it's not, you know, there's no way to do it. And so, Adam, I don't know if you want to share some insight on that at this point.
Yeah, no, that's a good comment, Paul, and thanks for sharing those thoughts. I do think when we just look at this plan, there's, you know, we've been involved with these types of corridor improvements in other communities, and one of the funding sources that other communities have used to enhance these types of street projects has been Transportation Alternatives Program funding. That comes through it's a federal program that's administered through the State Department of Transportation. It's competitive, but it does provide for up to 85% of project funding, with local match being around 15%. That could be a potential source of funding for these improvements. You also have tax increment that can be used within the broader downtown urban renewal district for public improvements. And I think between those two, and also obviously engaging the private sector in those areas where project economics can bear some of the costs, would be a way in which these projects could come together. It's not something that's going to be funded overnight. It won't be funded in the first year. This is something that needs to be phased and developed over time. And so, you know, this presentation of what Mike's put together, we really envision this being more of a phased approach to building out the corridor. That's a good question.
Paul, thanks for your questions. I'm just going to address Alexi's question here real quick, asking if there's an email option to submitting questions or comments. Yes, there is. If you go to our website, helenamt.gov, and find the community development section, my email address is there, so feel free to shoot me an email with your questions or comments. And there is not a date as of yet for the presentation of the final draft. It's just not ready yet. So that will be advertised when we know about it. Sharon mentioned that last night we kind of talked about what it would take to make this happen, and you kind of just touched on it a bit there, Adam. If you could go into a little bit greater detail on that, that would be great.
Yeah, so I'll try and recall my comments from last night. But yes, I think this is a project that the community could certainly implement. I don't think anything here is out of the realm of economic possibilities in terms of the implementation of this project. You know, it all does come down to funding, obviously. But I do think that there are some economic development tools and programs that are in place, as I mentioned previously, that could help the community in bringing this forward. And I think having continued participation with stakeholders, including the housing authority, including the tenants at the neighborhood center, and home builders in the private sector, to ensure that project economics are important consideration for this with the commercial and residential uses that are being proposed. You know, we can't place the expectation on those projects that they bear all the costs for improvements, that there needs to really be a robust public-private partnership to be able to lay the groundwork for a framework of implementation where everyone can benefit and ride the value chain moving forward. So I think having the additional community discussions and dialogues around the neighborhood center, you know, that's a building that was built, I think, as part of the Model Cities program, and it's aged. It's costly to maintain, and there needs to be enhancements and improvements to accommodate the programming and the services that are being provisioned out of that center. A new building is needed, and I think would provide great value to the surrounding community. One of the feedback elements that we received going through this process was many stakeholders really felt like the neighborhood center needed to stay where it was. Granted, a new facility could be developed, but that having it there on site seemed to be the preference of a number of stakeholders in the community. So I think that dialogue should continue to advance, and looking at ways in which a solution could be brought forward that would help with funding the development of a new facility there. I think looking at ways in which the city of Helena could look at, you know, incorporating and designing the permeable corridors going down into this design, particularly with the neighborhoods to the east, would, I think, really help. And I think this vision may be able to catalyze additional improvements in permeability and connectivity down into Cruse Avenue and the downtown. So, you know, I think moving forward, if the community can continue having those dialogues and discussions around these critical components and areas, that would be really critical to having successful implementation.
Great, thank you. Lee Schubert has a comment as well, and I'm not sure if you would be able to answer this, but I'll read it directly from chat. From a traffic flow standpoint, I know there's a fair amount of traffic that cuts up the south end of the Jackson Street garage, then across the open parking lot and onto Cruse. It is a shortcut to avoid having to use the Cruse Broadway intersection. I guess that's more of a comment. Let's see, Katie also has a comment. You've mentioned recreation several times in saying that I believe the solution should look to address access up to our trail systems in the Helena National Forest. And that's something we kind of talked about last night. Like if you want to address maybe at the southern end.
Yeah, I think one of the things came out of our stakeholder interviews and the first workshops was, you know, this south end of Cruse and Park, you know, is definitely the spring point for access into a lot of the trail systems. I'm not sure what we can do beyond, you know, our project area. I think there are opportunities into the hills in this area that Paul was talking about, where we can have these spurs that access some of those trails. But certainly providing the bicycle and pedestrian corridors down to this point is something that right now just happens with sort of curb stops. So it is a good comment, and I think as much as we can, we're definitely going to be looking at that.
Great. So Michael O'Neill also has a comment. We have a strong need for additional housing that is physically accessible, particularly related to the aging of the population. Do you see the housing types allowing for accessible housing? Does the elevation difference allow for different entrances, some physically accessible?
You know, I think that's going to be something that needs to come about when this becomes reality. But I would completely agree that, you know, having the ability to have one-story living, potentially with second bedrooms, for example, on upper floors, it would be a goal of these. You know, one of the things I did want to point out too, in the focus on the townhouse as a residential building type, there was a specific reason why I guess I sort of was focusing on that. And that is, if you build a multi-story building that has residential above it, the cost of construction of that building type could be 2.5 times the cost of construction of what I see being very affordable to build housing. So these units would be market rate in most instances, I believe. However, you could build these and sell them for the average medium home sale price in Helena, and have new construction with new amenities that's not old stock, and be affordable to first-time home buyers and or you know, people who are looking for that transitional house in the downtown area. So that, you know, if anybody's kind of wondering why that type was chosen, and it's because it is truly the most affordable single family residence design you can do. And that's why they were very common in poor neighborhoods of big cities and things like that, because it was affordable housing stock.
Okay, Paul has another question, comment. He says he is still worried about funding. He doesn't know what MDT would do for a proposal for such a low use corridor. Also, the Parks Department will be responsible for maintaining much of this proposal, which means another cost in the general fund. Are there any alternatives that fund for maintenance?
Yeah, this is Adam. I think a lot of these questions really kind of boil up to higher level decisions at the city level and the community level in terms of where to allocate funding and what constituents' preferences are in terms of where the city should be investing general fund dollars and capital improvement dollars. You know, and I think that would be a good question, you know, that for city council as well, as we get to that point and advance those discussions in the vision. You know, I think broader discussion, oftentimes, you know, you stop seeing the forest through the trees, so to speak. And I think another question that needs to be asked is, what is the cost of doing nothing? And what if you just left Cruse Avenue as it is and didn't do any improvements? I don't think that's anything that any of the constituents or stakeholders that we've talked to would like to see happen. All stakeholders that we've spoken to recognize that Cruse Avenue needs to see improvements occur in order to create quality of life and enhance the feel of community and connectivity in this area. And there's going to be a cost to that. So I think it just comes down to a community decision. Are we going to invest in ourselves and improve the built environment and the quality of life for our residents, or do nothing?
Great, thank you, Adam. We've gone through all of the chat questions and comments. I don't see any raised hands. Are there any other questions or comments? Maybe ones that I have missed. I don't think so, though. Looks like Paul has his hand raised.
Did
Paul,
you want, yeah, do you want comments on the document now or just in writing later?
If it's brief now, definitely, but also we'll accept comments later in writing for sure.
Well, I'm not sure exactly who, I don't know who exactly is supposed to be the audience on this, but there were a number of issues in the report that I think would catch the attention of any serious developer and make them a little dubious. You know, factual errors and stuff like that. Like the if you don't, I can give you a quick sampling of them. The Labor Temple was listed as being built in 1972, and it's clearly much older than that. There's a question about parcels in the middle of the road, which I think is left over from MDT Helena deal back when. But since it's city owned and you're going to have to survey anyway if you change the right of way, I wouldn't flag that as a question to get people nervous, since it would work out the same no matter what. And then the final one, just to be brief, the proposing multifamily in parks. There are places where I think that should happen, but a developer would probably shy away from that because of the public vote needed to convert parkland to for other uses. So if you're going to suggest that, it would have to be flagging that the city would have to take the first step to rezone that. So things like that.
Sure.
Paul, yeah, thank you for those comments. Yeah, feel free to submit those in written form and we can work to address those in the document. But thank you very much for your time. And
yeah, they don't cripple it, but it's something that ought to be cleaned up.
I think it's also important to note that any offloading of city property would need to be surplused by the city commission, so much in the way that the bus depot most recently has been. So there will be further scrutiny on any of those type of decisions. Okay, are there any other? Looks like Kathy has one. Generally, when will the final design be ready for public comment? 2 or 3 months? How will we find out when the next meeting will be? I don't see any information about today's meeting in the IR or anywhere. Kathy, tough to say really when the final design will be ready, but in the next month or 2, definitely. And as far as not seeing anything in the IR, we sent out a press release to all of the relevant media outlets around, and I guess they just didn't choose to write about it. So thank you for your comment. Okay, I don't see any other ones. Mike or Adam, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to mention just in closing?
I just want to thank, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, I appreciate, people actually taking the time to make comments and to look at things. We definitely want to, provide something here that is sensible, addresses, the different concerns that stakeholders have. And, ultimately, I know for me, Helena is my home, and it's something that I want, I want us to find the right solutions to these types of things. And I think we're a long ways towards a very good solution along Cruse. And, as was mentioned earlier, I'm just really excited about the possibility of it coming to fruition. So thanks everybody for your comments.
I'll just echo what Mike said, and thanks everyone for participating and engaging in this process. We obviously couldn't have done any of this without very robust stakeholder engagement. And so thank you everyone for coming out, attending these virtual open houses and virtual public meetings, reaching out to us, asking questions, submitting ideas, providing, supporting components and elements to this. And so thank you everyone for your participation, and we look forward to continuing the dialogue and moving this forward.
Great, and I know I already said it, but if you go to the City of Helena website, Community Development Department, and the current projects, my name is Mike McConnell. I'm a planner with the department, and my email address is on that webpage. feel free to reach out to me with any questions or comments that you might have. And if for nothing else, then to get on our email list for people who make comments. So everyone, thank you for coming today, and check your email, check media outlets, social media for future updates. So thank you.